colleague, Dr. Ronan Toolis, who's after Merlin or some such thing in the Scottish Borders, I believe. But he'll tell us more about it in a few minutes and probably shoot me for saying that. Over to you, Ronan. Thank you very much.
Lock and load. So thank you. So marrying archaeology with history is more often than not very difficult, if not impossible. Even more so marrying archaeology with legend. But this is what we attempted to do with the Drumelzier's Hidden Heritage Project in the Scottish Borders. This was initiated by the Arthur Trail Association and funded by a host of generous organisations. It was a community project with sort of 42 volunteers participating, about half of which came from local archaeology societies like the Peeblesshire Archaeological Society, the bigger archaeology group, but half were people who never participated in any kind of archaeology project before, and they were all ages. And here's some of them, blissfully unaware of the day of back-breaking work that awaited them. So what drew us to the site was this dot in the map in past map, the supposed site of Merlin's grave, which has been depicted in maps since 1775. You can see it here, and then the location here in the first edition map of 1859, and this is where it's remained in maps since. Why this is the case is this story, Life of Merlin in the Forest, which survives as an early 15th century account, probably written early, maybe originates in the 12th century. But it depicts this character, not Merlin, he's called Lailochen, which is the sort of precursor. Merlin was invented by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, which followed the early Welsh Merlin, which followed Lailochen. So there was even in the 15th century, they kind of recognised this as related to the Merlin story, which was common all over Britain and France and Ireland too. Whether or not it's true, it's part of Drumelzier's cultural heritage. It demonstrably goes back to the early 15th century. But what I want to say, and contrary to what John said, we're not looking for Merlin. And we weren't looking to prove the story was true. What we're looking for is the archaeological roots of the legend in Drumelzier. Can the archaeology, does it match with the places in the text with the period that the legend is set? Because the legend, the Drumelzier legend, is set in a specific time and place, and it involves real people, not least of which the place is Drumelzier itself. And these are the kind of excerpts that relate to the kind of local landscape. So Merlin's grave is kind of described the location. That's where people have led to believe, and they put this X in the map. And then there's this reference to this under King Meldred and his lofty throne on Drumelzier and Dunmellar. So we wanted to look at the archaeology, and this is Toolis Castle. The site of Merlin's grave is down here, and we looked at another site over here. So that's where they are on the map. So Toolis Castle has long been supposed to be this plausible site of this Meldred's lofty throne, the town of Drumelzier and Dunmellar. So looking at the Royal Commission survey done in the 1960s, the plan of it, about a sort of fortified summit with a series of enclosures along the lower lying terraces of the site, non-concentric enclosures, that looks a bit like an early medieval nucleated fort, not dissimilar to other nucleated forts in the early medieval period in southern Scotland. The Royal Commission surveyors also found sort of vitrified stone where X marks the spot. So vitrified stone is very useful when looking at hill forts because it demonstrates what the ramparts originally look like. You only get vitrified stone with dry stone timber-laced ramparts. And it's not the rubble face that was vitrified, that was melted, that was deliberately burned so high that the stone melted. It's the rubble core. And vitrified forts date from between about 800 BC to 1000 AD. So again, it's plausibly early medieval or earlier. Now, if you look at the map of Dark Age Britain, this part of the borders is usually a bit of a blank space on the map, which is not quite fair because there are a cluster of early medieval sites, early Christian sites, Latin inscribed stones. There's a cluster of potential nucleated forts. So there is something to look at, and these are part of a wider pattern of early medieval sites across Scotland. And the nucleated forts are important because they're a recognisable early medieval form of fort. These aren't palaces or castles. They're sort of preeminent households where there's often excavations find a distinctive material culture. There's imported pottery from the continent, there's jewellery, there's gold, silver and bronze jewellery making. So it's a kind of recognisable early medieval footprint these sites leave. So conceivably plausible as a site where an under-king might live in the late 6th century. The other circumstantial evidence is the name itself, Toolis, which could derive from Dinis, from the Cumbric language once spoken in these parts. But with all place names, there's always an alternative, so it could be Thane's Castle. But I would point out that the earliest map that depicts Toolis Castle, 1741, depicts it as Toolis Castle. So, enough of the theory. What do we actually find? Well, we dug 3 trenches. We wanted to look at the summit and one of the lower lying enclosures to see if the occupation of each matched. So the point of digging the 2 trenches on the summit was we wanted to see what the rampart here looked like and the archaeology on the southeast side and then also on the southwest side, and see if they matched, so they might corroborate each other, and therefore one can extrapolate right round the summit without digging all of the summit. We also situated these because they were as far away from the medieval castle, the sort of late 15th, early 16th century castle there. So we hoped that that had not been impacted by later medieval occupation of the site. So, Trench 1, we found the base of a large dry stone rampart. This comprised a sort of outer face of big stone blocks, an inner face of big stone blocks with this rubble core in between. This is 1.7 metres wide. We dug a slot through it to extract charcoal from the top, from the base, from the bottom of it, and also we had a primary deposit that underlay it. So we've got a good sequence of deposits we can take radiocarbon dating samples from and hopefully get a secure dates for this rampart here. So that was Trench 1. Trench 2 here, we found not any stone face, but we did find the rubble core of the rampart. In fact, it was vitrified, burnt and vitrified. You can see the reddish, that's because it's been burnt. We found in situ vitrified stone there. We also found burnt bone amongst that. So again, that's really good radiocarbon dating. That's a good sample we can take radiocarbon dating from. And then Trench 3 down here in this lower lying enclosure. So we excavated this. We found the inside face of a stone rampart. The outer face, much of it had fallen down the other side, down the slope of the hill. But we excavated this. This is 9 courses high, 1.63 metres high, and actually going down because we never got to the bottom of it. Much of what we were digging out there was these large rubble. And this was rubble that collapsed off the summit of the hill down into this and smashed against the inside face of this rampart. So where we were standing, looking at this photo, the summit is behind us. But all this tumble sealed a couple of soil deposits that could be occupation deposits abutting the inside face of the rampart, and included some charcoal deposits. So again, potentially good samples for radiocarbon dating. So again, we may be able to date the occupation of this enclosure and see if it ties in with the summit above. But what about the rest of the trenches? Well, when we first took off the turf, we found this stone rubble spread. This was the sort of collapse of the ramparts and of the castle. Below it, well, it was really just natural bedrock and subsoil. There was a thin layer, fragmentary layer of mortared surfaces and flagstones, but very, very little stratigraphy at all. And that the mortar surface indicated this was part of the medieval castle. You don't get mortar in the sort of early medieval or Iron Age periods. Trench 2, again, there was a massive rubble spread, some of it mortar stone, so it suggests that they'd maybe reconsolidated the rampart wall and it collapsed. Below this, we found the remains of a stone building. Again, there was more collapse. Stones from this stuff had probably collapsed from the wall itself, and the wall sort of abutted into the inside face of the rampart, encircling the summit of the hill. We tried digging through that, but time was against us, so we didn't quite get to the floor of this building. But we did excavate the sort of midden deposits abutting the outside face of this, and that gave us plenty of artifactual evidence for a medieval occupation consistent with the castle. So this is green glazed redware pottery, consistent with a kind of 15th, 16th century occupation. We found oyster shells, ironwork, animal bone, nothing inconsistent with the medieval castle, and nothing that we could say, well, that's early medieval or prehistoric. So what I suspect is that when they built the castle in the 15th century, they scoured the summit pretty much clean. They left the bones of the fort, perhaps, the base of the ramparts, but pretty much everything within the summit of the fort was cleared out, and then they built their own stuff to form the sort of bailey of the castle. So I'm afraid, despite all the best efforts of our volunteers, we didn't find any smoking gun. That's not the story's not stopped there, because we also took lots of soil samples, so we've got lots of work still to do, sorting the samples to get the small environmental remains, so we'll be able to build a picture of the environment of the occupation of Toolis Castle. And this is useful for identifying, maximising the identification of all the material we can radiocarbon date. So this is a sequence of all the context of the deposits that form the site. So this is helpful, so we can extract radiocarbon dating from secure context and therefore build up a secure chronology of the site, and hopefully extricate the fort from the castle. So on to the second site we looked at. We looked at Toolis in a nice summer, sunny August. Thurston Barrows was damp, dreary October. Now, this site was only discovered in 2018. A local man spotted these crop marks from the hill. Historic Environment Scotland did an aerial survey that summer and found these crop marks, and so you can see those there. What drew me to this site was not the three round barrows, the circular ditch there. That indicates a ditch where the soil's deeper and therefore there's more moisture in the grass, so that's why it's greener than the surrounding grass, and then there's small features in here. But what drew me to this site was this square barrow, because if you found a square barrow north of the fort, you'd assume it was Pictish, i.e. early medieval. That's what they usually come out with as some dates. In southern Scotland we're not so sure, but then we've not excavated any square barrows in southern Scotland, so we thought, well, let's look at this and see if this is part of this potential early medieval cluster in Babelshire. So there's the four barrows. We wanted to excavate this square barrow and this round one just as a sample. So these two were left alone. So we started with a geophysics survey led by Magnitude Archaeology. You can see the two barrows, the round barrows they found here, and funnily enough, this field was where the volunteers did the geophysics survey. This field, which was done by the solely by the magnitude archaeologists, they found zilch. So, yeah. So it was some trepidation that we opened up the trench over where the square barrow was, because we weren't sure we were going to find it. There's nothing there according to the geophysics survey. And the volunteers, a lot of the work, they've found a square barrow. You can see the ditch here with this right angle corner, and it's heading into this. So we didn't expose all of the square barrow, but found enough to characterize it. It's a square ditch enclosing an area with two graves inside. I say graves, we assume they're grave. They look like graves, but we didn't find any human remains. That's often the case in Scotland with acidic soil. Often bones don't survive. So, but we can't give up there, so we separate it into grids. Oh, sorry. There. So we separate it into this grids to take soil samples so we can analyse the soil chemistry and therefore determine if human remains were ever buried there. Dating this is difficult because you can't date soil, can you? Well, actually you can through optically stimulated luminescence dating, i.e. when that soil last saw sunlight. So we took a sample from the section of the ditch with some difficulty with all the stones, but we managed to take a sample. So that will go to St Andrews University and they'll try and date when the face of the ditch last saw sunlight. So hopefully we'll get a date there so we can tell roughly when the square barrow dates to. So that was it there. We looked at this round barrow next. That's a square barrow there and the round barrow on the other side of the field. So here we discovered what looks like a ring of stones. The stones filled a ditch. So originally it was an earth barrow, capped probably with a cairn of stones, because it wasn't all the ditch that was filled with stones, it was just some sides of it. So that collapsed down and then it's ploughed flat for centuries. So you can't see anything from the ground, but that's what was revealed under the surface. So that's what the geophysics survey had found. So the volunteers got stuck in there, revealing cremated bone burials with Bronze Age pottery. In fact, one of the pots containing cremated bone was taken whole from the site because it was such a fragile state. We thought we can't really excavate it carefully on site, so we wrapped it up and took it to the Guard Finds Lab. And in fact, only just earlier this week, a couple of volunteers helped our prehistoric pottery specialist excavate this cremated urn inside a nice, safe, dry Guard Finds Lab. So what they found was a undecorated miniature cremation urn dated to about the Middle Bronze Age, so about 1550 to 1150 BC. So that's pretty much, that dates what that barrow is. It's a Bronze Age barrow. And I suspect the other two round barrows are Bronze Age too. So nothing to do with the early medieval period. The square barrow could be Iron Age or early medieval, and what's interesting is why that's tacked onto this earlier Bronze Age sort of barrow cemetery. So on to the third site we looked at, Merlin's grave. Well, we weren't digging the site, we were just doing a geophysics survey. And this was again led by magnitude surveys. And this is the account in the Canmore in the National Monuments Record of Scotland. And they speculate that maybe the tradition arose from a Bronze Age kist that had been found. That still happens. A plough disturbs the stones and archaeologists sent out to do a rescue dig. So that was the theory, but nothing was really known about the site. So we just wanted to see if there was anything under where the dot in the map is. We targeted a bigger area because the dot could not be quite the right place, so we wanted to look at a wider area around there to see if there was anything actually under the ground. And so the magnitude surveys, they used magnetometry survey and found zilch. Well, not quite. Rig and furrow, maybe a ditch here, the metal fence down at the bottom, and then these anomalies, which could be ferrous objects or geological, but nothing grave-like. So afraid the mystery remains. But the story's not over yet. We've still got a lot of post-excavation analysis to do. As we come up with results like radiocarbon dating, we'll put them in the blog. So if you want to follow that, it's darkagedigs.com. There's an interesting blog there that covers the whole site from the day one of the Toolis excavation all the way to the Finds Lab excavation and beyond too. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Ronan. If you could sort of float around here. I'll just try and escape from that. Right. Well, first of all, thank you for our two speakers keeping well in time and actually a unique experience, actually. I don't have to show the get off the stage signs. Well, we've got lots of time for conversations, discussions, before we all run off for well-earned tea and coffee. So this is a point where we open up the floor to the invited guests with some trepidation from the speaker's point of view. Who would like to go first? Questions, comments? Please put your hand up. Or is everybody desperate for a coffee, tea and biscuits? Must be so. Oh, sorry, Ange. Sorry.
It's just a comment. Mick Jagger. It was just a comment, really, regarding the square ditch that you were just talking about. Totally agree that it's Iron Age is a possible date, but there are square ditch features at Thorny Bank associated with early medieval kiss burials, and unfortunately at Thorny Bank the bone preservation is exceedingly poor as well. Although teeth did survive in some cases, and they did quite an extensive radiocarbon dating program, so it'd be really interesting to see what dates you come up with.
Yeah. I thought they had. I know there was a square barrow at Thorny Bank. I thought they didn't excavate it.
No, some elements were excavated.
All right,
yeah.
they did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I should have known that. I helped excavate that site.
It's okay, Ronan.
Not the square barrow though.
Unless I'm sorely mistaken,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
pretty sure
Right,
that.
yeah.
that
Well,
they did.
that's useful to know, and we'll compare that.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
okay,
good.
thank you.
I've got a comment. So, the 4 barrows, were they on a sort of time of promontory, or were they, I was trying to figure out how they occurred in landscape?
No, they were flat field.
Right.
You couldn't. There was nothing apparent at all. There's no sort of. They weren't on a ridge or anything. Just flat field at the bottom of the valley.
It's a bit strange. Just, I suppose, comment where you've got the cat scene, which is obviously probably a Neolithic standing stone, but then it's the centre of a Dark Age, well, 5th, 6th century cemetery. So that connection between, going back into the Bronze Age and Neolithic is a connection that you've got potentially there as well. So just reusing the same site.
Yeah. I think you do find early medieval sites often reuse earlier sites, and there's this maybe a kind of appropriation of the past going on. Yeah. So that's a kind of avenue of research we're going to pursue, but we just concentrated on what was there first.
Thanks very much. So I can't quite see the light.
Conveniently.
We've got the 2 troublemakers there.
Yeah. I got a quickie for Ronan and a quickie for Maureen. At Drumelzier, there was also a beaker grave found with a very early continental style beaker. How close was that to your sites?
I don't know whether the beaker find was, so we just looked at the supposed site of Merlin's grave. We just kind of concentrated on that.
Okay, but that's an avenue that you can pursue now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And for Maureen, inevitably I'm interested in your early Neolithic material. Have you got radiocarbon dates?
Yes, sir.
Good-o. Are they about 3,600 for your modified carinated bowl pottery? Thank you.
So there's 2 people right at the back. Roughly about there, and then.
I have a question from Maureen. I know that there was a degree of contamination and mixing with the dating, But do you think, or is the evidence showing that the early Bronze Age timber circle is the same day as the cremations?
Do you know, again, I just looked at it the other day and I now can't even remember. I'm beginning to doubt myself. It was actually early Bronze Age. Again, I'd have to get back to you. I'm really sorry. I feel so. It's going to get published very soon, I have to say. Yeah. I'm actually still doing the research on it. And certainly they both are Bronze Age in day, and it would be lovely that they are both, if they are both the same, it's really quite special because it means that in a Neolithic it looks more domestic, but then when you come into the Bronze Age, it seems more of a sort of ceremonial landscape you're getting here. And this happens an awful lot, and I'm sure folk here can say an awful lot more than what I could about it, but a lot of times in the Bronze Age, in these periods, things seem to be put into prominent ridges or mounds in the landscape, and that's found all over, really.
I mean, the work of the Guard is actually very similar to what you might hear in the next couple of years. What you're looking at, when you came across it, it was very hard to photograph. It is actually very much on a ridge, and it slopes quite, I say steeply, but quite prominently down to the south. So, and potentially to the north as well, but what we thought when we visited the site was that what's missing is the ridge of probable sandstone, which certainly would be an outcropping, and it seemed to be quite a feature. And you got these sort of things at either end, and we debated, and I wasn't going to put you on the spot, whether it could have been some kind of ritual cosmic enclosure that we could have been finding there with that strange ditch coming up, and it seems to be, and you got all these pits. It's a wonderful site. And then Garda digging another site, Emerson, which is turning up very similar stuff. And then if you go further, west, around the Buxton area, that area, in the 19th century, they were turning up bodies left, right, and centre there. And Cairns went when they put the 20th century housing in there. So you're almost looking like a ridge of joining the dots of sort of early historic sites on the edge of Edinburgh. You know, looking over the plain of Midlothian and Edinburgh to size. So there's some research in there to actually see that. I'm not going landscapes of the dead. Alison's looking at me and nodding, yeah, thank you. I got the right thing. So you're looking at that sort of thing going on. So, but it's fantastic. Thank you, Maureen.
Yeah. I think that's the thing about the big linear ditch is I forgot to say there was 2 gaps in it as it went along. But obviously we've only got that section, so we can't really say exactly, like you were saying, is it causewayed or whatever.
I think
so
it's also the fact dating the evidence is because it's got such a lot of mixing up of dates. You don't have, unlike elsewhere, lots of bone.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Sorry, Maureen, you're not probably going to be able to answer this then. You said that you had a date out of the Palisade Trench, which was late Bronze Age or early Iron Age. There's quite a difference there, but taphonomically secure dates from Palisade Trenches for the late Bronze Age are unusual and hard to come by.
Yeah, I think the thing about the site is that, like you said, because of all the mixing up, it's quite difficult. You know, it's difficult to say that it's definitely that date. There was just so much. You know, a lot of the charcoal was like domestic hearth waste. You know, so even in the timber circle, that's what we were getting. And the botanist Susan was saying it was probably more likely just, you know, infiltrated there through time. It wasn't actually deliberately put in. You know, so I think there's just been so much disturbance in the area, you know, to actually say that something is definitely that period, really.
I think where we discussed post-X regard, I mean, we're hoping for double the amount of dates that we could actually get, and we've been struggling to get any dates. It's almost like spot dating, really, but it's giving a flavour of what they are, right? You know, those sort of larger cut features rather than.
I mean, it sounds as if there's huge mixing on the site, so that actually we're not really dating that palisade at all.
I think, I mean, that's it, even with the pit alignments, and the 2 pit alignments, I looked at that and I thought, oh, you know, it's going to be, you know, early, but we're getting these dates all over the place, you know, and you're thinking, well, what are you? You know? Tell us.
In answer to Alison's question about the Drumelzier beaker, it's the other side of the river, quite a lot further down.
Any other? Oh. Come all the way down.
I'll run.
We need to get another microphone, I think. I suppose, yeah.
Thank you. There are well laid down procedures for the ultimate reburial of human skeletal remains when they're discovered. Looking at that large plastic wrapped mass which proved to contain the cremation urn, what's the ultimate destination of that?
That'll be up to the sort of treasure trove unit, because that'll be submitted to them and they'll decide where it's allocated. So once we're done with all the analysis, we're published, it'll be submitted with the rest of the excavation assemblage to the treasure trove unit, and that's who decides where it goes.
It'll be effectively will go to one of the local museums.
Okay.
So we'll be bidding down in treasure troves in. Which will be later on for the stuff obviously from Westlow and Gilmerton, because it's it's very rare in our collection. So looking at former national museums, they've got lots of the stuff up there. So we'll take it, and it'll be carefully curated along with our archaeological collection. And I assume that'll be the same for Scottish Borders or whoever takes the museum.
Thank you.
So is the gentleman down front?
Thank you. It seems a particularly rich site there at Langloan. Is there any particular reason why you should find so much material on that particular spot? Supposing you'd done a field like that, just to the left or to the right, would you expect to find as much, or was there some special feature why it should have been there?
I think basically it was, I mean, in the wider area there could be other stuff, but I think it's because it was on just this big prominent ridge. I mean, we do have domestic hearth waste in the Neolithic pits, so we're presuming there's obviously going to be some sort of settlement somewhere round about that area. It just hasn't been found yet. You know, but I think certainly this ridge, this prominent, you know, that'll be why really, I think. You know.
Sorry, if I could say, we actually excavated some of the fields nearby. We didn't find as much prehistoric stuff there, but further away we're excavating really rich prehistoric features basically on the same ridge, just a few miles down along the way. So although that ridge isn't necessarily completely chock-a-block with prehistory, it's a fairly good bet that if you're going to develop that kind of area, there could well be prehistoric archaeology there. So it kind of demonstrates how good it was that there's a planning condition requiring an archaeology evaluation, because before that it was a kind of essentially, it was almost a brownfield site. We knew there was industrial activity going on there, but you know, it looked like a greenfield site. It's an agricultural field. So the evaluation discovered all the stuff that no one knew about before. So
I say that it's benefit of what we do in the last 20 years. I mean, a lot of the housing developments were done in the 80s where no work has been done really. And we are looking at, even the industrial archaeology is turning out really important stuff as well. So getting a whole landscape of how we use that part of Edinburgh. And the Lothians actually, really, because it was at one part of Mid-Lothian.
Yeah, just as a kind of follow-up to that, these ridges right down the East Lothian plain, that's where we're finding a lot of the prehistoric stuff. We did a load of work, it's been reported at conference at East Linton, and that's exactly the same. We had a bedrock ridge running through the site. We've got barrows, we've got post alignments, we've got goodness knows what else. Same at Port Seaton, it's right the way up and down that eastern seaboard. Whether it comes inland, I'm not entirely sure yet, but yeah, that does seem to bear out on a landscape terms.
Thanks, Time maybe for a couple. Alison again, and then maybe a couple more questions before we maybe retire for an early coffee and tea. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Flying the flag for CSAF, the South East Scotland Archaeological Research Framework. You made a fantastic point, John, about the wealth of archaeological evidence that there is in this part of Scotland. But because there's been so much development, you know, a lot of it has gone. I happened to be looking at Chalmers' 1810 book Caledonia the other day, and he described large conical mounds, including one beside Newbattle Abbey, which was destroyed in 1782. A skull was found, or at least a skeleton was found, and the skull was kept. It's just been radiocarbon dated. Surprising date. It'll be published in DES, Discovery and Excavation in Scotland. But he also described other large conical mounds, one in Collington, one elsewhere. So it's worthwhile going back to antiquarian descriptions before much of Edinburgh was built up, to take stock of the wealth of material there. And one thing that CSAF will do will be to draw out these geographical and topographical patterns of who did what when. And going back to Margaret, your collared urns are likely to be between 1900 and 1600 BC.
I agree. I mean, it's all that stuff around Annick Hill that, I mean, if you look at the antiquarian accounts, it's almost like the road of death. They're digging out, bodies left, right, and centre where the former waterworks were, and on that hill. Even the first edition of this map, you see sites and cairns that are no longer there, and they've also been dug up. I think some of them have been published in PACS back in 18 whatever it is. But I don't know if the National Museum. I mean, there's something to go looking for them where they all are, and try and date them. It's a research project for somebody. It's a Richard. This could be the last one.
Hi, thanks. It was just a question for Ronan. I was interested in the partnerships behind your project, Ronan, and how the project was set up. You mentioned some of the funders. I was wondering, did you go to the local community groups and the local societies? Did they come to you? How did those conversations work? And did the funding mean you were then able to bring in professional archaeologists to work with the local groups?
It was the Arthur Trail Association who got the funding together, and we're kind of collaborating with them to sort of deliver the kind of archaeology aspects of the project. So
they approached you, did they?
Yeah. They approached us, and so we helped plan it. But they applied. They got all the funding together. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. On the subject, hopefully we can all go off a nice tea and coffee. We'll be back at 11:15. I'd just like to thank this morning's speakers and our VIP guests. Thanks very much.